If you have a jar of honey in your cupboard, you're not exactly alone. Americans consume some 618 million pounds of honey in 2021, and the worldwide honey market is valued at more than $8 billion. It's not exactly forgotten history that bees play a vital role in the ecosystem and are key to pollinating plants worldwide, but perhaps less well known is exactly how long the history between humans and bees go. Perhaps among the oldest relationships between humanity and another species. It deserves to be remembered that humans have been collecting honey and protecting and nurturing beehives since prehistory. Apiculture, or beekeeping, has been practiced by humans for millennia. Honey is most commonly collected today from the bees of the Apis genus, especially the western honeybee, native to Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. Unlike most bee species, honeybees live socially in colonies built around a single queen. Cultures around the world have incorporated bees into their mythology, from the Egyptians and ancient Greeks to Hindu, Hittite, and Sand mythology. Depictions of humans gathering honey from wild bees date to at least 10,000 years ago, including 8,000-year-old cave paintings from near Valencia, Spain, that show wild honey gathering. For hunter-gatherer societies, searching for wild honeybee nests is called honey hunting. Archaeologists have discovered chemical residue of beeswax across Europe, North Africa, and the Near East, proving that humans have been exploiting bee-related products for at least 9,000 years. Evidence that humans maintained artificial hives specifically for collecting honey only comes much later. Ancient Egyptians are known to have been maintaining artificial hives for as long as 4,500 years. The honeybee is commonly depicted in ancient Egyptian art from the founding of the first dynasty, when the title Sealer of the Honey was first given, 5,100 years ago. A 5th dynasty tomb from 4,400 years ago depicts workers blowing smoke into beehives in order to remove the honeycomb, not dissimilar from modern practices. An Egyptian official was responsible for mounting expeditions to the desert to collect honey and resin from bee nests. A manuscript from the time of Ramses III has the pharaoh saying to a god that, "I have made you archers and collectors of honey, to collect honey for you." Beeswax was used in the casting of copper objects in lost wax casting in the Bronze Age, such as objects found in Judea between 5,000 and 5,500 years ago and in ancient Sumeria. In lost wax casting, wax is used to make a mold in sand. The sand is then heated until the wax melts, and brass or bronze can be poured into the mold. Numerous references in the Old Testament also relate to honey and to Canaan as the land of milk and honey. In the Iliad, Homer refers to bees storing up honey in jars. Likely the jars have become homes for beehives. Mesolithic paintings from central India also show honey hunters. Beekeeping seems to have come slightly later to China and with different local species of bees. The earliest mention of beekeeping in China comes from the 5th century BC. The ancient Hittites had laws to punish anyone who stole bee swarms or hives. The Sand people of South Africa also relied on honey in prehistoric times, and bees and honeycombs play a large role in their rock art. The oldest honey ever discovered was found in the country of Georgia in a nobleman's grave from around 5,500 years ago. The website Save the Bees explains the tomb belonged to an important chief or leader. He had several other people buried with him. Inside his Bronze Age burial site were wild berry offerings to the dead. They were still red and incredibly well preserved, despite being 4,300 years old, because they were cured with ancient honey. This handily beat the previous record of honey found in King Tut's tomb, 2,000 years newer. The oldest direct archaeological evidence for beekeeping comes from a site in Israel dated to 900 BC, where 30 intact hives of straw and unbaked clay were discovered. Archaeologists suggest as many as 100 hives could have been kept at the site, which could have produced 1,100 pounds of honey annually. A 4th century BC Egyptian papyrus describes building artificial hives, advising that one does not build a royal palace for the honeybee. A hive of dung is better than a hive of stone. In the ancient Greek city of Knossos, beekeeping paraphernalia such as hives, honey extractors, and smoking pots have been found. Across the world, in Central America, the ancient Maya were collecting honey from an entirely different kind of bee, a stingless bee of the genus Meliponidae. Keeping stingless bees is called meliponiculture, and the Maya kept bees in hives from at least the 3rd century BC. According to the journal Acta Americana, Maya meliponiculture reached a higher level than anywhere else in the world. The Maya continued to practice beekeeping the same way their ancestors did, keeping hives in hollow horizontal logs with one enclosed by a disc of wood or stone. When the Spanish arrived, each Maya household had as many as 60 hives. Bee and honey played a large role in Maya culture and religion. Honey was used in the creation of alcoholic drinks, used in rituals, and they worshiped bee and beekeeper gods. Despite the antiquity of beekeeping as an activity, there remains some considerable disagreement over whether bees are truly domesticated. It appears that apiculture began in Egypt before spreading throughout Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, while it appeared separately in China and possibly India. Initially, humans likely attempted to get bees to settle their hive in more convenient locations to gather honey before apiaries were established. Humans have affected bee genetics through artificial selection, selecting colonies that produce more honey, were less aggressive, and were hardier, especially in cold weather. In 1603, an English writer wrote that the bee I may well reckon a domestic insect, being so pliable to the benefit of the beekeeper. Some modern writers, however, have questioned the degree of domestication. Despite thousands of years of semi-captivity, researchers P.R. Oxley and B.P. Oldroyd argue that bees are only managed and that they are largely unchanged from their wild cousins. Others note that bees, even in colonies managed by men, are perfectly capable of leaving artificial hives to establish wild hives without intervention. Domesticated or not, they were kept in artificial hives over much of the world in the Common Era. Roman writer Varro describes some beekeepers building hives of wicker, others of wood and bark, others of a hollow tree, others build of earthenware, and still others fashion them of fennel stalks. Several Roman writers disparage the use of baked clay hives as poor quality, while thimble-shaped baked clay hives have been found at Greek sites. North of Italy, bees were kept differently east and west of the Elbe River. To the west, skeps, basically overturned baskets, were most common. Made of wicker, grass, and straw, depictions are common in medieval manuscripts. Skeps were often harvested by tossing the entire hive into the water to drown the bees before harvesting the honey. In Eastern Europe, bee forests were more common. Beekeepers would cut or expand cavities in trees to attract hives, 5 to 25 meters up the tree. Warmer regions, such as Spain, used cork hives to protect the colonies from heat. Most of these early hives would have to be destroyed or seriously damaged to gather the honey. In Middle Age Europe, beekeeping was a lucrative and important task. Sugar was not widely available, so honey was the only common food sweetener. It was used to brew mead and flavor ale, to sweeten porridge, and was used as an ointment on wounds and rubbed on a horse's legs when it was ill. But the more important and lucrative product was beeswax. It was used as an adhesive, a binder for charcoal black pigment and other paint, for sculpture, for casting metals, and for candles. West African cultures used beeswax to cast brass gold weights. Beeswax has been found intact from various sites, including a Bronze Age foundry. Monasteries regularly raised bees for wax, but often needed more. An English abbey south of London recorded producing 155 pounds of wax in 1269-70. Wax was also used to shape religious icons, to leave at shrines and churches, and mixed with resin, it was used for wax seals. Wax was imported across medieval Europe, especially from Russia, Spain, and Africa. No illustrations of beehives have been found from the so-called Dark Ages, but beekeeping seems to have flourished. Mead is mentioned in poems, including the 8th century Beowulf. Charlemagne required all manors to keep bees, and that 2/3 of the honey produced be given to the crown. Laws from the reign of King Alfred of Wessex recorded that stealers of bees would face harsh fines. Beehives were even used as weapons. In 908, citizens of the city of Chester in England broke a siege by throwing beehives over the walls. William the Conqueror's Doomsday Book included a survey of the number of beekeepers and hives. 601 hives were counted in Essex. An old Anglo-Saxon charm has been found that was spoken in an attempt to keep bees from swarming, which starts, "Seal down, victory women, sink to earth, never be wild, and fly to the woods." There's also an old custom found throughout Europe of informing the hives of marriages, births, and deaths, called telling the bees. If not informed, the swarms might die or become aggressive. Though today it is hard to imagine beekeeping without protective suits, it seems to have come late to apiculture. No depictions of protective clothing exist until the 14th century, when a Flemish manuscript shows a beekeeper wearing a veil. A French version of Virgil's Georgics shows a kind of tailored cowl. By the mid-15th century, drawings show beekeepers wearing clothes resembling modern protective clothing. While relatively little about Chinese apiculture has survived, in 1273 the Mongol government published a book with a section on beekeeping, which displays nuanced knowledge of the art, 200 years before any similar book was produced in Europe. Korea and Japan also kept bees by at least the 7th century. In Southeast Asia, relief at Angkor Wat shows bees being collected in artificial hives. Probably the most important advancement in apiculture was the invention of artificial hives that could be harvested without killing or even seriously disturbing the colony. In 1696, a refugee from Crete in Italy describes his time in Crete from before 1669. He describes traditional top-bar Greek beehives, which had a number of small lengths of wood, 2 fingers in breadth, laid across the top of a basket-like or ceramic hive. The honeycomb was produced along the bars, which could then be removed. Several of the bars would be left intact to maintain the hive. Examples are still in use today, while possible versions of this movable comb hive have been dated to the Archaic Greek period between 750 and 480 BC. Even older possible hives have been found dated to 3,500 years ago. Travelers noted these kind of Greek hives by 1676 and in several later publications. Thomas Wildman published a treatise on the management of bees in 1768 and described the construction of a hive with parallel wood bars atop a straw hive, so that there are in all 7 bars of deal to which the bees fix their combs. He also described hives with sliding frames. Wildman's work also described other advances, reporting on hives meant to preserve bee colonies from Brittany in the 1750s. In the 1700s, a Slovenian painter and a teacher of apiculture named Anton Jansa changed the shape and size of bee hives, making them smaller and square so that they could be stacked. Professionals like Jansa and scientists began to examine bees more closely during the Enlightenment. In 1814, Ukrainian Petro Prokokovic invented the world's first hive which used frames. In the 18th century, Swiss naturalist Francois Huber developed a movable comb hive that had wooden leaves that could be flipped like the pages of a book. In the 1830s, Polish apiarist Johann Dzierżon created a movable comb hive with exact measurements for the distance between combs. In 1850, Lorenzo Langstroth, a minister born in Philadelphia, studied Dzierżon's work as well as Jansa's before he began developing his own movable comb hive. He noticed that when the bees had less than 9 millimeters but more than 6 millimeters of space to move, they would not block the path nor build comb into it. Like Dzierżon's exact measurements, this encouraged more efficient building of comb, and Langstroth dubbed the distance bee space. Langstroth developed a new frame hive that incorporated these spaces and prevented bees from building the honeycomb on the sides of the hive box or cementing areas closed. Bees instead only build along the frames, and even the frame comb is kept separate. The patent for his hive, called the Langstroth hive, was granted in 1852. His hive was practical and top-open, which proved to be more popular than various other designs invented around the same time. The Langstroth hive in its basic form remains one of the world's most popular designs, and the basic design of the national beehive more commonly used in England. This hive design is the basis for commercial honey production in Europe and the United States, and further advancement in hive designs have followed around the world, often designed to fit the particular climate or bee subspecies being raised. In 2006, beekeepers in the United States began reporting dramatic losses of up to 90% of their hives, many with novel symptoms. Sudden loss of a colony's worker bee population. While similar collapses have been recorded, the sudden rise led to the coining of colony collapse disorder. The cause of the disorder is still somewhat unclear, although studies generally point to pesticides, the varroa mite, and extreme weather. But similar unexplained events have occurred throughout history. In 1869, an anonymous beekeeper reported colonies dying but leaving behind ample amounts of honey. In the 1890s, similar reports of colony collapse were reported clustered in May, leading to the name May disease, though it was possibly a disease called stone brood. The Isle of Wight saw several years of extraordinary colony loss without certain explanation. Numerous other events in Australia and the U.S. of disappearing disease have had various explanations as recently as the 1990s. Whether these were also examples of colony collapse disorder is unclear. You might have heard that honey lasts forever, and to an extent that is true. Because of its low moisture, high acidity, and the antimicrobial process by which bees make honey, honey actually lasts indefinitely, and honey found in ancient tombs is often described as still edible. But please be warned, if honey is stored improperly, if it gets moisture inside of it, the honey can go bad or ferment. The loss of bees is a sobering idea. Penn State University's Center for Pollinator Research says that 3/4 of the world's major food crops benefit from pollinators like bees. So as you sit down to eat watermelon, kiwi, pumpkin, cucumber, apples, avocados, almonds, blackberries, and much, much more, remember to thank a bee. May 20th is Worldwide Bee Day, a day that is dedicated to acknowledging the roles of bees and other pollinators in the world environment and their importance to human agriculture. To learn more, go to un.org/en/observances/bee-day. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy. Check out our community on thehistoryguyguild.locals.com, our webpage at thehistoryguy.com, and our merchandise at teespring.com, or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo. And if you'd like more episodes on Forgotten History, all you have to do is subscribe.